Hi, it's Kim from Embodied Connections Australia, and as I was saying yesterday, I'm back today to answer Sprocket's question about do you need to use a funeral director if someone dies here in Australia? Now, the short answer is no, you don't. So if you, I can elaborate on that. I'm going to say no and end it there. But you might be interested to know that before World War One, most funerals were held at home and the bodies were prepared at home. And that's where people would come to view the body, and that's where the vigils would be held. And then after a few days, the body would be taken away, and that's when the burial would take place. And at the end of World War One and in the early 1920s, that's when undertakers and what we now know as funeral directors started to become responsible for preparing the body and also conducting the funerals. And so that's when death started to become more medicalised and people started to become more removed from it. And it became something that people didn't really understand and were overwhelmed by the processes and the ideas around it, and it just was so much easier just to pick up the phone or contact someone and ask them to come and get the body, and everything was done. And once the person died, that was it. Some people do have open caskets, but mostly nobody ever saw the body again or really even knew what had happened to it, and then would just go and see the coffin, usually in a church setting. And that's when there really started to become that huge disconnect between when someone had died and their funeral and what actually went on, and really, I think, affects the grieving process a lot when there is that disconnect, and 1 minute the person's there and then they're just gone and they're never seen again and nobody ever really knows what happens to them. And so now in the 1990s, crematoriums started to become more prevalent, and so then people started to have a choice between cremation and burial, but again, it was mostly still outsourced to other people, and they would, again, take the body away and it would just happen. And now COVID obviously has changed that again with the restrictions on funerals, and so people had to start to rethink. And so then the funeral started being live streamed, and so a lot of people weren't physically there, and not necessarily because they didn't want to be, but because they couldn't be because of the restrictions on the numbers that could actually attend a funeral. And so that again increased the distance because people would watch a funeral over live stream and not even physically be there to grieve together and to comfort each other. And so there's been so many shifts and so many changes, but all of those shifts and changes have just really served to medicalise death and to distance people from it. However, there is now becoming a shift again back towards home funerals. And in fact, last weekend was the official launch of the Australian Home Funeral Alliance. And the mission of the Australian Home Funeral Alliance is to make a home funeral available to all Australians, because as we know, funerals can be very expensive. They can really eat into the savings of family members or the person who's died. And so the main thing to know from all of this is that there are no laws whatsoever in Australia that regulate funerals. So there is nothing that legally requires anybody to have a particular type of funeral or to use a funeral director or to be bound by any regulations whatsoever. The second most important thing to take away from this video is that you have a choice. You always have a choice. And I'm not saying that there's no role at all for funeral directors to play. I'm not saying that you shouldn't ever use a funeral director, but I'm just saying that you have a choice. You have a choice as to what sort of funeral you have. You have a choice as to whether you have a casket or whether you have a shroud or whether you have some other type of burial, whether you have a cremation, whether you have a green funeral. And you don't need to be dictated to by anybody. You don't need to be bound to any particular regulations or laws or ways of doing things. So I think that makes it more important than ever to have that conversation with your family members. Find out what it is that they want. Let them know what it is that you want. And remember that you always, always, always have a choice. It's your decision. It's your choice. So please, 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 if you remember nothing else from this video, remember that. And if you want to get in touch and talk about it anymore, find out some more information, I would love to have that conversation with you. So give me a call, send me an email, send me a message, and please, please, please remember, you always have a choice. Thank you. I will talk to you later. Much love. Bye.